This week we're going to check out the Reolink 5 megapixel RLC 420. You have two power options. You have power over Ethernet, which is great. Plus you have your standard 12 volt camera plug if you need that option. And we're going to integrate it into Home Assistant using the new Stream component. Let's check it out. So in the box you get your mounting template and the instruction manual, the quick start guide, but we probably won't end up using that. We're just going to dive right in and plug it in. Got your Ethernet weatherproof connection, help keep the rain out of the Ethernet connection. Get your screws and anchors in case you're mounting it in sheetrock. Get a short RJ45 patch cable, it's great. And you get a screwdriver. And you're probably asking, what's the little screwdriver for? Well, on the camera itself, normally this is mounted this way, mounted to the ceiling, and then you pivot this around and the bulb pivots up and down. On the back of it, there's two screws to loosen the door for the micro SD card. So if you choose, you can have the recordings record directly to the micro SD card and you can play them back from the camera, as well as using a hardware NVR or such a software NVR such as Blue Iris. So to install this camera, you just loosen this screw here and this all pops apart, and you'd mount this on the wall or the ceiling, and the ball camera itself just pops in and this slides around it. And that's it. Of course, for power over Ethernet, just use a power over Ethernet switch. Plug in your RJ45. It feeds over all the data through Ethernet, which keeps it secure and not overusing Wi-Fi and doesn't bog down your Wi-Fi and your 2.4 gigahertz. Plus, the power comes from your main source, which you can also run a battery backup on these. So as I showed in the live stream when I first showed this camera a few weeks back, and I happened just to pick these cameras up on a great deal, and I got one installed and fell in love with it since it worked well with Home Assistant. I wanted to share it with you guys. I showed just a standard PoE switch, which some people may not understand what power over Ethernet is, which basically, to dumb it down, if you buy a PoE switch that has the standard 802.3 AF, plug it in your network area to your router or your other switch using another port that's not PoE. This switch happens to have 4 ports that are power over Ethernet. And simply, all you do is you run Ethernet from here to the camera, and the camera and the switch take care of making sure it has the proper power. It's that simple. You just plug it in and go. No having to deal with other power adapters or trying to figure out how to get power to a camera. Just run your simple Ethernet cable and that's it. Since the camera and the switch will negotiate the proper voltage over the Ethernet cable based on the length of the Ethernet cable you're using. So let's go get it installed. So first, what I like to do for the camera install is plan your install. You can usually simply take a picture with your phone and try to find a good point of view that the camera would be looking at. Once you found a good spot, make sure you have access to it to run the wire. You may have to get creative with some spots how to run the wire. In this spot, we're actually using an eave, which is fairly easy access in this home with attic access. And remember, since we're doing power over Ethernet, we only need one Ethernet cable to run to this camera. So we'll use a drill and a paddle bit, and we'll drill in the spot. Make sure we are drilling in a spot that's not going to be into a floor joist. And make sure you do drill the hole big enough for all the connectors on the camera itself to pass through the hole. So once you have the hole drilled, clean it out, make sure that you do have access to it. If not, you may have to patch that hole. To run the Cat5 cabling. In this case, we're using Cat5e. You can use Cat6 if you'd like, as long as you use all the connectors and everything, but it may be overkill for the typical camera usage. Another thing to look out for when you're purchasing Cat5 cabling, make sure you're purchasing solid copper cabling, especially when doing PoE runs. You don't want any of that garbage that says CCA, which stands for copper clad aluminum. It's aluminum that's just coated with copper, and it does not work well with PoE and several other different things. So definitely make sure you buy the right cabling. And I'll leave a link to the cabling that I use down in the description of the video. If you don't already have a set of these, I highly recommend getting a set of fiberglass fish sticks. Some people call them glow rods. There's many other names for them. And this happens to be a 2-section 8-foot size. They do make several different sections. And if you're in a home that has, say, 10-foot ceilings, of course, an 8-foot might not be a good choice. So you might as well just go ahead and get a 12-foot. Unlike I did, I just got the 8-foot. And I have run into issues in the past where I'm fishing wires in a 10-foot ceiling. These fish sticks, they're great for running wire in the attic. They're also great for running wire down to switch boxes if you're trying to change out wiring. Great for Ethernet runs, coax, etc. They truly are your best friend when you start running wire in a home. So we're going to attach the Cat5 cabling with electric tape, and we'll simply push the fiberglass rod with the Cat5 cabling up through the hole. We'll leave a small section hanging out of the hole, so in case we can't get it for some reason, we can go around and pull this rod back out of the attic. But given this is an 8-foot run, you won't have to belly crawl in through the eave, all in the insulation. You'll just be able to simply go up in the attic and pull the fiberglass rod along with the Cat5 cabling. It makes life super simple. So we'll go ahead and position the Cat5 box to be pointing towards the hole, so when we do get in the attic and we pull the Cat5 cabling through, it won't get tangled. Now up in the attic, right here for us, without having to belly crawl all the way down to the eave, here's the fiberglass fish stick with the Cat5 cabling. And we'll continue to run the Cat5 cabling down to the networking area in this home. That way it can be terminated into the power over Ethernet switch. Once you have your cable pulled, you can cut off the mount from the box. You can go ahead and run your mounting plate for the Reolink. We just used some simple wood screws and centered it around the hole. A little different angle, showing the wire coming through. Next, before you terminate the Cat5 connector on the end, make sure and put the watertight connector. And we did this even though it was in the attic, just to keep things out when we had the connector already. Slide it over your wire before you terminate. I've done that before, and it's easy to forget. And again, make sure your hole is big enough for all of these wires and connectors to fit through that you drill in the eave of the home. We have plenty of slack. We need to pull this down to later service the camera or even swap the camera. You take the Cat5 cable and you'll plug it into the connector along with the little rubber seal on the Reolink camera, and simply loosen the back end. It clicks on and screws down, and there you have a watertight seal on a Cat5 cable connected to the Reolink camera. You'll push all the wires back in, up into the attic, and then simply snap in the camera into the plate. You will tighten that small black plate with a Phillips screwdriver, and that'll tighten everything down once you've set all the different angles and rotation of the camera after you've gotten it set up. The camera looks great, right there on the corner. It'll point across the yard in this home, and that's it for the installation of the camera on the eave. So before we get into the installation of the web GUI and Home Assistant installation, let's check out the specs on this camera right quick. Of course, we know it's power over Ethernet. It also has audio recording. It's waterproof with motion detection, and definitely it is easy PoE. Huge plus there being PoE. I highly recommend doing PoE when you can. One thing to note, there is a 4 megapixel model of this that has been renamed the D400. The D400 at this time, they've changed it to not work independently. It will only work with their NVR. So I wouldn't recommend getting that model. Just go ahead and get the 5 megapixel RLC 420. There's also a bullet style that's a very similar model, the RLC 410, I believe. It's going to be pretty much the same camera, but it's just in a bullet style format instead of a dome style format. So you may choose what camera works better for your installation. So this particular camera has 18 infrared LEDs, and they claim up to 100 feet of night vision with an 80% viewing angle. There is a Reolink application for iOS, Google Play, etc. that you can use with this camera if you like. Of course, you can also pair it with their NVR if you choose to. And for the full specs, the camera is a 2560 by 1920 to be 5 megapixel. It is an H.264 compression. Now the frame rate states it's only at 25 frames per second, but as of the recording of this video, there is a firmware update on their support page that will increase this to 30 frames per second. As we mentioned before, there is the built-in microphone, and this does have a web interface that you can view it, and it does support a micro SD card for recording directly to the camera SD card, as well as doing playback. You do get various protocols, and one huge plus, it does support HTTPS, SSL, along with RTSP. You can automatically send stuff via email or FTP, etc. There's many choices on the protocols this camera can use. It's a very flexible camera. And if you're looking at PoE switches, this camera does use less than 8 watts if you're adding up all your cameras to determine what size PoE switch you need. And this does support the 802.3AF PoE standard. So you need to get at least a switch with 802.3AF. Let's dive into the GUI of the camera itself. So when you first log into the camera with an admin ID with no password, on Chrome you will get the Get Adobe Flash Player icon. If you do click that and say allow, it will pull up and start showing your camera. So one thing I do like about this camera, there's no special software to install. There's no plugins that only work with Internet Explorer. I've tested this with Internet Explorer and Firefox and Chrome, and it all pretty much works the same. It does work through Flash. So you do get the playback option. That is for if you have a micro SD card installed in the camera. Front page of here, you can take a snapshot. You can make the aspect ratio be centered. And you can also hear the volume if you turn the volume up and down from the camera in this live view. Basic settings, you can name the camera. You can change the position of the name of the camera along with the date and time. For the encoding, you can change the streams, the resolution. Here's the 30 frames per second. You can up the bit rate, change the profiles, etc. There's many options in here. Along with the image, change all the brightness. If you've changed the camera position where it's upside down or it needs to be mirrored or rotated, you can choose these options here. In the advanced, you can also change the white balance, the backlight, 3D noise reduction, the whole 9 yards, also about the night LEDs. So we'll try and run through these real quick. If you don't want to see all the web GUI options, you can just skip through to the Home Assistant section when we use the stream component. But typically, I do find people won't show the web GUI interfaces on cameras, and I like to see all the different options. So I'll run through those for the ones that want to see this. There's a watermark option. These are some of the same options you saw on the previous screen. You can change the stream options. Again, there's the 30 frames per second, which I did mention in the latest firmware upgrade. In the advanced, you can change all the scheduling with the recording. Under networking, you could change to a static IP to DHCP. Advanced, this networking gives you all the dynamic DNS, the NTP, email, FTP, etc. Set the sensitivity for the motion. You can also change which areas trigger for motion. So if you don't want to trigger the entire camera viewing angle, like if, say, for instance, you've got some bushes that are blowing in the wind, you'd want to take those out of the motion trigger so it doesn't always trigger off those same bushes. So you just square off the area you don't want it to trigger off of. It's a great little feature to help keep the false positives down. Under System, General, you'll get the video standard, set your time zone, the date format. You get your daylight savings times, which is important. Under the information, you'll get the build number and the hardware number, which will apply to when you go get the firmware update I've mentioned a couple of times, which I will leave a link in case you need that to Reolink's page to download the latest firmware. It's not a bad idea to go check every once in a while and see if you have a new firmware update for your cameras. To the maintenance page, that's where you can download your configuration or import your configuration, and this is also where you perform your firmware upgrade by clicking here and then clicking the upgrade button. It's really simple. You can also use your factory reset. Performance shows the CPU loading along with the bit rate currently pulling from the camera itself. You can perform auto reboots. You can change the users or add users. You can set guest users. Simple system. And under device shows the SD card. I currently have a 32 gig in here. Of course, it does show a 30 gig. And you can format the cards in here. Pretty simple layout. If you do record to an SD card, keep in mind, as we all know, SD cards do wear out, but you can record to SD cards as well as using something such as Blue Iris or any other NVR hardware or software based solutions, and also record that way as well. That way you're double covered on your recordings. So the playback feature is pretty nice on this camera. It shows the days that you have recordings, and down at the bottom it shows a timeline. If you want to pull up one time, every little blue section at the bottom shows when it had recordings. So of course, if you have a thicker amount of blue lines, there was a lot of movement at that time. You simply click the timeline you want and it will jump straight to it. It is pretty quick. It'll jump straight to it and pull straight from the SD card. It's like its own little mini DVR. But do keep in mind that that SD card's in the camera itself. So if someone happens to take the camera off the outside of your home, then your recordings also go away with it. But vice versa, if someone takes your NVR, then your recordings are still in the camera if they happen to leave your camera as well. So you kind of have to pick your poison per se, or you can, like I said, you can do both. And you can also, if you'd like to download a particular recording, if you need to export it, to say give it to law enforcement or whatnot, you can click the download button here straight from the GUI. It gives you a list of all the MP4 files, which is your standard video format, and it has the begin times and end times, and simply find the one you want and click the download button. It's a great little feature. So it's a pretty simple web GUI, straightforward, works great, easy design, no problems. Now let's go check it out, streaming it in Home Assistant. So in this section, may not apply to you, but we're going to show how we use this in Home Assistant and use it straight in the front end. As of Home Assistant 0.90, you will need to be at this version or later, due to they've added the camera streams for everyone feature. As before, your camera streaming was limited to 2 frames per second only in the front end. It didn't look too great and it just didn't work too well. I can tell you that it's totally changed with the new stream component. And don't be afraid, it's very easy to set up, and they actually have a forum thread that you can simply copy and paste out what you want exactly for your camera. And I will leave a link to that in the description of this video. So 100JM, which is also the one that was talked about in the Home Assistant documentation for bringing the stream component, has started a confirm configuration thread on the Home Assistant forums. Simply find the camera type you want. Of course, if you're using this camera with Blue Iris, you could actually pull it straight from Blue Iris. Or if you come down to Reolink, and you must be on 090.1 or better for the configuration to work, and we'll simply copy the high quality section and change the user ID and password along with the IP addresses, and we'll paste it in the configuration YAML, and that's it. So for the stream component, it's not difficult. There's simply one line you need to copy into your configuration YAML to enable it. So we pasted stream : straight into the configuration YAML, and now we need to configure each camera. So from the confirm camera configuration thread, simply copy this section out, and we'll copy it to the YAML. You'll give it a name that you'd like to use. You'll need to change to an IP address, and I would highly recommend assigning a reserved or a static IP to your camera so it the IP address does not change in case your camera reboots or during a power outage and things get different IP addresses. That definitely wouldn't be good. You'll supply the username if you've changed the username, and as well you need to change a password for your camera. For the stream source, you'll do the same. You apply the username, the password, and also change the IP address. And if you did change the port number of RTSP from 554, which normally you could leave the same because it's specific to that camera, then you'd also change that as well. They did have a lower quality one where you can change to the lower quality one if you have issues on an older computer not being able to handle the 5 megapixel stream. But you can also lower that stream source in the camera itself to not be a full 5 megapixel camera. So once you've done that configuration, we'll go back into the Home Assistant GUI. We'll go to General, and check Config, and then restart Home Assistant. Now if at first glance you don't see your camera, you will need to edit your Lovelace to add a card for your particular camera. You should be able to find it in Unused Entities. If it's not in there, you can go grab your camera and test it. So there are various cards you can use, and all I've used is a picture entity card and assigned it the camera dot, and this one happens to be driveway in stream, which you can find your camera name in your entity list of Home Assistant. By clicking the second icon here on the left, it shows the states of all of your entities, and you can find your exact camera name. Now we'll leave these two configurations in case you do need them in the description of the video. So once you paste them in, save your config of Lovelace, and you have your cameras up. And now to show you the stream, you simply click the camera you like. If you're not using the preload stream, you will take a few seconds to load the camera stream, and it will show you the camera in live, and it looks great. You can see the movement. There's not much movement right now. You can also do this full screen to show the camera. You can also turn on the audio. And that's it for setting the cameras up in Home Assistant. So all in all, it's a great little camera, especially for the price. You just can't beat it. Has all the great features: SD card, PoE, simple web interface. I love these little Reolink cameras. It's got a clear picture. It's easy to integrate in a Home Assistant. You can use it with Blue Iris, any other RTSP recording software. One thing you can do, if you like, you can, as several people have done with various cameras, just due to the whole trust issue, which I also have with firmware that's not open source, you can just go ahead and put this on a type of VLAN in your network and totally block this network from having access from the internet. I've actually done this using what I've shown with the Ubiquity access points and the Edge router, or also the USG, or various other routers that you can do VLANs and block internet access to using the various firewalls. And that way you keep everything local within Home Assistant and or Blue Iris, and you don't have to worry about someone hacking or any type of backdoor of firmware of your cameras. So that's all for this video. Like I said before, we'll leave all the links in the various descriptions and different copies and paste and things you might possibly need for the camera. Simple to install. I appreciate you watching. If you're not already a subscriber, definitely make sure and become a subscriber and hit that bell icon so you can catch our next video and live stream. And y'all take care.